Hello BookTube, welcome back to my 2026 library tour. In this episode, I'm continuing the history part of my library with this second shelf on this one small bookcase that really should be in the little manga room. First up is St. Edward's University, A Centennial History by William Dunn, CSC. So this is a history of my alma mater. I was a student at St. Edward's University in Austin, Texas in the early 2000s. It was probably one of the happiest periods of my life, although probably at the time I would have not agreed with that. And I think when I entered as a freshman, they gave a copy of that book to everybody. This is a really good book, The Impeachers. The Trial of Andrew Johnson and The Dream of a Just Nation by Brenda Wineapple. Read it a few years ago and quite enjoyed it. Next is The Dead Are Rising, The Life of Malcolm X by Les Payne with Tamara Payne. So this is a biography of Malcolm X. Came out a few years ago, won the Pulitzer Prize and the National Book Award. And I read it, I think, for a round of the BookTube Prize in 2021 or 2022. Because I think this was one of the last books I read for it. The BookTube Prize. Because I think 2020 was the first year of the nonfiction. And I did every round for that, and then I think I dropped sometime in 2021. Although it could also be jump a year for 2021 and then 2022. But anyway, it doesn't really matter. Next is El Norte, the epic and forgotten story of Hispanic North America by Carrie Gibson. So, this is a history of the United States and Mexico. And, okay, I'm seeing mostly the United States. One Canada. Not as much Mexico as I thought there was going to be. Oh well. I've never gotten around to this, so that's why I'm a bit stumped. I did not care for her earlier Empire's Crossroads, so I haven't been as enthusiastic to try to get around to it. Next is A Queer History of the United States by Michael Pronsky. This was a pretty good book. I enjoyed it when I read it. This is part of a number of histories of the United States, with the focus being on indigenous and marginalized peoples. In this case, queer people. Next is We Have Not a Government, the Articles of Confederation and the Road to the Constitution by George William Van Cleve. So I picked this up from the University of Chicago Press during one of their super sales, which I need to get on to the latest one. Although I probably won't be picking up as much history, if any. Have not gotten around to this yet. A Generation Divided, The New Left, The New Right, and the 1960s by Rebecca E. Klatch. So have not gotten around to this book yet. I've had it for a few years. Waves Across the South, A New History of Revolution and Empire by Sujit Sivasundaram. So I picked this up from the University of Chicago Press during one of their sales and haven't gotten around to it yet. Next up is a book that I did not get on with, and that is The Silk Roads, A New History of the World by Peter Frankopan. So this is a fairly small history of the world with a focus on communication networks and trading networks. I attempted to read this about a year or two ago and did not get on with it at all. There was something about it that really annoyed me immensely, so I set it aside. Australia, A New History of the Great Southern Land by Frank Welsh. So this is a big history of Australia that I don't think I got on as well with as I did his earlier South Africa book, which we will see tomorrow. Visions of Empire, How 5 Imperial Regimes Shaped the World by Christian Kumar. I'm interested in empire, and it's part of the reason why I picked this book up. Also to see what empires were covered. I picked it up from Princeton University Press during one of their sales, I think, and have not gotten to it. So the next batch of books are all the modern Middle East, starting with Black Wave, Saudi Arabia, Iran, and the 40-year rivalry that unraveled culture, religion, and collective memory in the Middle East by Kim Ghattas. So this is a history of the 40-year conflict between the Iranians and the Saudis, as well as what led up to this conflict, so for much of the 20th century, the dominant strain in the Middle East was Marxism. But starting in the 70s, and certainly through the 80s and 90s, and pretty much all of the 21st century, that kind of strain has gone more into a more religious direction. And this is a really good book that looked at it. I really enjoyed it when I read it and wanted it in my library. Next is Arabs, A 3,000-Year History of Peoples, Tribes, and Empires by Tim McIntosh Smith. This is a really good overview of the Arab world. It was a fantastic read, and McIntosh Smith is a hoot of a writer. This is history as it should be written. I also have an earlier book, A History of the Arab Peoples by Albert Hourani. And this was also fairly good, although this is more of an intellectual history than other history, if I remember correctly. The 100 Years' War on Palestine, A History of Settler Colonialism and Resistance, 1917 to 2017, by Rashid Khalidi. So this is a really good book. I really enjoyed it when I read it back in 2021 or 2022. I think it was my favorite book from that year. It's an amazing look at the origins and continuation of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and how it's just sort of been a quagmire and like an ongoing thing for a century, and now more than a century. Next is Digging Up Armageddon, The Search for the Lost City of Solomon by Eric H. Klein. So Eric H. Klein is an expert on archaeology and the sort of archaeology as a discipline. He's written a number of books about that. This one is, I think, in the same vein. It's about the excavations in Israel. Have not read it yet, although some more of his work will be forthcoming. In two separate shelves, which is probably why I would like to get rid of this shelf and put all of these books back with their larger books that are in the same subject and organization thing. So we move from the modern Middle East to magic. First up is The Triumph of the Moon, A History of Modern Pagan Witchcraft by Ronald Hutton. So this is a really good history of the modern religion called Wicca. And Hutton looks at how Wicca formed, what intellectual strands informed its development, and its history in the 20th century. Hutton also wrote a book dedicated to the witch, A History of Fear from Ancient Times to the Present. So this is a history of witches and the witch figure across the globe, and is also really good, although very dense. It was quite hard for me to get into, and it did take me a few attempts to get into the book. And if you're at all curious, Hutton regularly appears on Gresham University's YouTube channel. He often does a series of lectures. The most recent one I saw was one on Hecate, which was really fascinating. Next is Roman History, SPQR, A History of Ancient Rome by Mary Beard. So this is a very interesting and perhaps weird look at Roman history. So what Beard does is she takes as her endpoint the granting of Roman citizenship to most of the subjects of the Roman Empire who were not slaves. And then she works her way back to, as much as we can tell, what the actual archaeological foundations of Rome are. And then she kind of works her way forward. Now, the thing is there are some periods of Roman history for which there are a lot of sources, namely the decades before Augustus and the decades after Augustus. And then there are periods where there's not really a whole lot to go on. So there's a lot of focus on certain areas of Roman history and not much in others. But that's generally because of what sources there are. And this shelf is going to wind up with some ancient history. This is The Woman Who Would Be King, Hatshepsut's Rise to Power in Ancient Egypt by Kara Cooney. So this is a biography of the ancient Egyptian pharaoh Hatshepsut, who is or was one of the few women to rise to the position of pharaoh, king of Egypt, on her own. And she ruled for a few decades and was part of Egypt's golden age. She was one of Egypt's better rulers. I cannot say much for this particular biography. It never really worked for me. I'm not much of a fan of Cooney's writing. So that wraps up this shelf. I will be back tomorrow with the final shelf on this bookcase, and then I will proceed to the next bookcase, which will take about a week and some change. So until I see you then, BookTube, thank you, have a great afternoon, and stay safe.